I wanted to talk today a little bit about intimacy with God. Intimacy is really about the closeness we have in a relationship, and the nature of intimacy is something that we perhaps understand if we think about a marital relationship, or we feel like a very close friendship where we share a lot, we talk a lot about stuff, we open up our hearts. And intimacy with God is something that we certainly find very clearly in the Bible. It talks about that very beginning, that first relationship that Adam had with God as he walked and talked with God in the garden, that there was that closeness, that place where there wasn't a barrier between them. There wasn't the barrier of sin, of wrongdoing, of things that got in the way. And so we see that is illustrated so strongly and so clearly in the Bible. Intimacy isn't just a public show of affection. It's just not the outward things only. That might be the thing that other people see, but intimacy has to be something that is personal and that is exclusive as well. Our walk with God has got to be something that is as real for us on a personal, individual level, in private, as it is to be seen by others and noticed by others in a more public, in a wider setting. And so, how do we develop this intimacy? How do we work on developing closeness to God? Sometimes we feel close to God, other times we don't. Sometimes as a Christian, you'll feel that it's an amazing moment, that suddenly God's presence is very real and it's wonderful, and it feels absolutely fantastic. Other times people can feel in a very difficult place, a dry place. It feels like a desert place, a desert experience in their life. And so our moods and our emotions can change enormously. They don't always tell us perhaps how things really are. So biblical intimacy is something that we want to really understand. Now, the Old Testament, in the early part of the Bible, it talks about God's relationship to his people Israel. In the book of Hosea, the use of the term the bride comes out in Hosea 2 verse 20. It's a very strong picture, and the whole illustration of Hosea is about a man, a prophetic man, who goes through tremendous pain in his personal life, betrayal, adultery of his wife, who seems to be interested in other men, and the heartache. And God really helps us to understand that's how he feels about his people. He feels they have betrayed him. He feels that they have gone into adultery. They have turned away from him. They've rubbished the relationship, and that's deeply painful. We see that even at the time of Noah, that God's heart was so deeply cut up with that desire to be close to mankind, and yet this terrible separation and divorce from people. And so God's heart is always to bring that place of reconciliation. And we recognize too that, in something like Ezekiel 23, it talks about how this terrible unfaithfulness it exemplifies people turning away from God. These kind of metaphors are used all the time in the Bible, explaining that intimacy with God is so much like that deep union that ought to be there, and ought to be a faithful and true one in a relationship, in a marriage relationship. And so when we come to somewhere like Isaiah 62 verse 5, it says, "For as a young man marries a virgin, O Jerusalem, so your sons will marry you, and as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so your God will rejoice over you." So there is that bridal relationship, the bridegroom, God as the bridegroom, and the bride as his people coming close to him. And this restoration, Jeremiah talks about the land being devoid of marriage, and the celebration of marriages as they go into exile, and then those things returning as they return back to the land. So it's very interesting how the human connection of intimacy, the celebration of marriage, is something which goes sort of just seems to come right alongside this return of this relationship, this renewal of covenant between God and his people. And we see that again in the New Testament. So in Ephesians 5, we see this interesting analogy between the two. In Ephesians 5:26 to 27, it's talking about this relationship between man and wife. And then it quickly switches into this relationship between God and his people. It seems that the two things are very, very similar. One illustrates the other incredibly well. And so the Ephesians talks about the husband's role to sanctify her, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a glorious church without stain or wrinkle or any such blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. So it moves quickly from that illustration of Jesus's relationship to the church, and then it switches straight away to the relationship between man and wife. And so ultimately, this culminates in that true and full and complete union. In Revelation 21 verse 7, it says, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." There is the marriage supper of the Lamb. There's this complete fulfillment of all that God had planned for the bride to come and meet with her husband, and for these two to come together fully and in completion. And so my prayer today is that we will come into that place of intimacy. There's lots of ways in which we can work at this, and it may not be always looking the same at different times in our lives, but I want to pray that God would bring us into a closer intimacy with him, that we would be drawn. And as we work at that relationship too, as we cultivate it through reading the scriptures, through our times of prayer, maybe taking time to listen to God and journal things and jot them down. I pray that God will speak to us. I pray that God would draw us to himself, that we would see that actually he wants to be intimately involved in every area of our lives. He wants to be intimately involved in our thoughts, in our actions, in our everyday situations, in the innermost parts of our being, in the things that we are wrestling with. God wants to come into those things, be part of that journey in the areas that we find most difficult, perhaps most personal. God wants to come in and guide us and help us. Intimacy is about that depth of relationship. It's about that reality of relationship. It's about the personal and the specific and the very human, the very real walk that we have in our lives. It's not about just the outward show of our religious activity or observance or activity, the things we get involved with doing. It's about that walk with God on a personal level. And as that grows and matures, it might look different. It might have the freshness that needs to return from time to time, for sure and absolutely. But we want it to deepen. We want that intimacy to grow and mature, not just be excitable when things are going great, and apparently lost when things are going badly. But intimacy is about walking with someone over a long period of time, through thick and thin, through the ups and downs. So my prayer is that we would find that journey in our own relationship with God, that he would draw me closer to himself and you closer to him as well, and that we would find that as we journey together in that experience, that we would find that intimacy with God is something that we can share with others, that we can talk about and understand with others, and perhaps we can encourage each other as well in that area of our Christian life. It's such a foundational thing to walk with God. It's a foundational thing to draw on that intimacy as the bedrock, as the foundation of everything else we do. And it's so easy for ministry activity, it's so easy for even very, very good things that we have a great passion for, to almost replace our personal relationship with God. So my prayer is that we would dig into that. That would be the bedrock of everything that we do and all that we are in our walk with God, and that he would draw us into a place of closer and deeper intimacy. Bless you.